You're listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Here are your hosts, Fran Chismar and Tom Kinesic.
Welcome back to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast presented by Pinelands Nursery. I am Fran Chismar.
And I'm Tom Kinesic, and today we have a very special episode, kind of a failure of our own doing in a sense. Fran and I were talking about how we had every episode pre-scheduled, not recorded, but pre-scheduled all the way from basically the beginning of the year through middle of March.
Yeah. Yes.
And then we actually had 1 week, 2 weeks ago, where we were going to record 2 episodes.
Yes.
We had a meeting that popped up on one of the days, and then the guest that day actually said, hey, you know what? I haven't been feeling well for the last couple of days. Do you mind if we push this? And we all said, yeah, that's a great idea, knowing that we were going to have to find a new guest for this week. And we tried and nothing really panned out. We had one guest that said he would do it, but he's like, I really want to do it with this other person, and I'd rather them come to the nursery and do it later in the year. And we all kind of agreed that's probably the better idea.
And we definitely could have made a few last minute phone calls yesterday. And those episodes have worked in the past, but I always feel weird when we're throwing it together, getting someone to agree, saying we're doing it tomorrow, we'll put it together. It's always worked out well, but I feel bad doing that.
Yeah. So I actually had a script in the bank from years ago. It was originally going to be episode 102.
Real? Wow.
It was another one of those times where we needed a guest, and in this case, last minute, we were able to pull it together.
Yes.
And didn't have to use this script. And it might be maybe our most important guest ever to some of you.
It's a new low. It's a new low for the podcast.
And, well, I wouldn't say it's a low. I think it's actually probably a high. And it's something where people have heard this story in bits and pieces, but today they're going to hear it all together. Today we take a break from our regular scheduled programming to dive in the enigma that is Fran Chismar.
Yeah, I kind of feel, when you told me about this, I kind of felt like I'm pretty open about all of my stories. And I feel like throughout the course of 4 years, I've told much of my story. But you kind of assured me it's been bits and pieces over 4 years.
Yeah.
And I don't always elaborate because of time, so I'm curious what you have for me today. I'm curious if there's anything I can tell that I haven't shared.
Well, and I'm hoping, again, I wrote these questions to some years ago now, and have not looked at them since.
I was actually thinking when we talked about this yesterday, we haven't officially done a Tom episode, although you were part of the Pinelands Nursery one and the one that you did with the seed fields with your brother, because I know the two of you talked a lot about
that. Was kind of my idea is sometime in the future, maybe even 2 years from now, we'll come to this point again where we had a guest or didn't have a guest and we need to throw something together last minute. And that's where you can interview me.
Yeah, I'll have to start putting my Tom questions together.
But I think one of the things we've developed over these last 4 years, nearly 4 years, 4 years as in a month or less, is we've learned quite a bit. And I wouldn't say we've established ourselves as experts, but I think we have a story to tell individually now too.
I do.
When we started, I don't know if we were there.
No, definitely. Even there's a big difference between now and 2 years ago. Had we done this at episode 102, I think it's more pertinent today, where I think people would be more interested, and it's a better story overall. I think. So,
yeah,
I hope.
Yeah. So with that, I'm going to kick into my first question.
All right, go ahead.
And
it's weird not knowing what the questions are.
I know, because I did not share these with Fran at all too, so he didn't get to prepare in any way, which I know is driving you nuts.
It really is. It really is.
That makes me smile a little bit, knowing how you're getting a little squeamish
OCD,
over there. Yeah. But the first question I had was,
Yes.
Did you grew up in a suburban area?
Yes.
And with from what I've learned from you, a family that you didn't go and like camp a lot and do all that kind of stuff. Did you have an appreciation for nature as a kid?
Somewhat, and you mentioned that my whole childhood, we went on one vacation. We would do day trips to the beach or I guess where I grew up down the shore. Those always happened, but we went on one vacation when I was 6 or 7 to the National Boy Scout Jamboree, which my father was very involved in Boy Scouts his entire life. And we went to Pittsburgh, and they bought a pop-up trailer that got used that one time and then sat on our front yard for 2 years. It became like a fixture of the property, and then they sold it. But
seems like there's a lot of purchases like that where people are like, I'm going to buy this $1,000 kayak, and we're gonna be kayak people, and then all of a sudden they don't have. I'm not picking on you with the kayaks too, because you use your kayaks. I do know people who bought kayaks and then all of a sudden don't use the.
But we don't go as much as we like. We go like twice a year, which in our minds we were going to go once, often, and it just doesn't work out that way. But being in suburbia, like the houses did have trees. Like I remember as a kid, like a lot more bugs. Like I remember a lot of caterpillars and a lot of inchworms, and there were green spaces in Levittown. There still are, like right across the street from my development where I grew up, which is now condos, was a garden center, Pazanka's, which had supplied all the pansies to the World's Fair when it was in Flushing Meadows. So as a kid, my mom would walk me to the garden center a lot. And we would walk through there. We would go to Black Ditch Park, which was right outside of our development also. But it was more like a really rundown strip. But going fishing with my dad, we were members of the Penn Warner Club in Tullytown. So, I didn't know trees. Like I had an appreciation of the outdoors, but like I had never really been in woods or anything like that. Like not like my kids had a different upbringing than I did, because they obviously, with my connection, they had much more. But I did Boy Scouts as a kid, so I had that. But I don't know, it wasn't as strong of a connection, I would say. As a kid, like I had access to it, but it wasn't like I think back about like some of our past guests and how they've described it. I didn't have that. But I had a little bit of an appreciation.
Yeah, I'll save my answer for that when you interview me.
Okay.
But I can agree with some of that and reflect on it in my own life differently.
It was there.
We did have a lot of outdoor appreciation for a lot of outdoor interactions.
Did you hunt as a kid with your dad?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
See, like I didn't know anyone that hunted. Like that was like it was a blue. I'm sure people did. I just didn't know them. But it was a blue collar neighborhood. Most of the people in our development, their fathers worked at Fairless Steel. It was like basically like a steel mill town. That was a lot of the
very interesting.
Yeah.
So, when did you realize you wanted to work in the green industry?
About 4 years ago. So, and I know. I mean, if you're okay with me going in depth, some of this stuff I've glossed over, but never really gone into it. So, like, I had always thought. Like, all kidding aside, like when I was a kid, I thought I was going to be a Major League Baseball player. Like, I was actually pretty athletic, like 3 varsity letters in high school. And I thought I was going to go to school to be an English teacher. Like, I was really into literature and writing. And I thought that was going to be my path. And I know I mentioned before I never went to college, but I never explained why. So, I mean, this goes way back. But so my father grew up in Philadelphia, in Kensington, which has had its lows and starting to come back up in Philly. Not a fantastic part of Philly, but when he went to the Korean War, his family created all of these charge accounts under his name and didn't pay any of the bills. So when he got back from the Korean War, he got thrown in jail. And
Not a great way to come home.
No, so he swore at that point he would never borrow money. Like, if you don't have the money for something, you're not doing it.
Yep.
So I think it was like 10th grade you start thinking about college. And I was like, oh, I'm going to go to school. You know, maybe I'll get a soccer scholarship, which never materialized. Like, I got a lot of Division III offers, but nothing that was money related. And he was like, well, there's no money for college, so you're not going.
Yeah.
So, and at that point, like, unfortunately for a 16-year-old kid, like, I was kind of devastated, and I kind of fell into like drugs and alcohol at that point because I gave up. Like, when I was a smart kid, I was in the gifted program. I was tested twice as a kid. Like, my 2 IQ scores were 139 and 142. So, like, I had the intelligence to do it. And I remember like having conversations with guidance counselors, and they're like, "You sure you're not going to college?" Like, and they give me the back then it was all the forms for financial aid, but I didn't know what to do with them. Yeah, like I remember having them going, "Well, like I don't know the information to fill it." I just didn't do anything. Yeah, and I drank and found drugs. So not like a junkie, but like, you know, was doing LSD and mescaline and marijuana and that kind of stuff. So and drinking. So I almost didn't graduate high school. Like, it came down literally to the last week of high school. Yeah. I had already failed. I needed one more math credit, and it came down to the final, which I got a D on to pass. And I had gifted English 12th grade. The whole year was working on a term paper, and I hadn't done it. Yeah. And the teacher pulled me aside, and she was at one point a neighbor of ours. And she's like, "I'm doing this out of respect for your parents, but if you don't turn in the term paper, you don't just fail, you get an incomplete." Yeah. Like, you're repeating the year. So I put the term paper together in 3 days when I had a whole year, and I actually got the second highest grade in the gifted program. All of the points deducted were typing errors because I typed it on a typewriter from like the 1930s, you know, so it was all typing mistakes. So, but sorry, I know I'm taking the long way to get to this.
I think it's very insightful.
So I had mentioned before after school, I was working at like a JCPenney, you know, at the local mall. And after the holidays, I got let go. And my dad literally is like, "If you don't get a job, you're out of here. Like, you're not just sitting around."
Now, he had a great line for this.
I just feel like I've said it all the time. He was like, "I have two fantastic opportunities for you. You're either going to join the working class or you're going to join the homeless." So, and I had a friend at the house at the time when he said that. Like, he said it multiple times. It became the running joke. Like, and he was starting to give me a timeline. Like, you got to the end of this month. Yep. So, I had a friend that worked at Moon Nurseries, and he worked in their wholesale yard. He was a foreman. And he's like, "Man, I can get you a job. We're always hiring." And, you know, we get to run big equipment, like payloaders and front-end loaders. Like, it's fun. Like, we'll have fun. So I think it was February 16th, 1989. I remember
I wasn't born yet.
So I went in. Well, that was my first day. I went in, and I was kind of goth back then. So I had like high spiked hair. Wouldn't be unusual if I had eyeliner on. Like, long black trench coat. Like that kind of stuff. And they're like, I remember it was John Stell. I still know people that I worked with back then, and they were like, "Oh my God, you were a sight." And they were like, "Don't hire this guy." And my boss, for some reason, was like, "Well, I need people, and he's a willing body, so I'm hiring him." Yep. And I went home the first day and cried. Like, we were taking trees that had been overwintered in chips, and everything was frozen solid. Like, and it was cold, and it was hard work because we're moving like 3-4 inch caliper trees. Yep. And like, I went home, I'm like, "Oh my God, this is what I have to do for the rest of my life." Like, I made a big mistake. Like, I have to figure out how to go to college. You know, like, this is not going to work. I'm like, maybe I can work enough to go to college. And then I was like, I remember sitting there, and after that, I'm like, well, if I end up doing this for the rest of my life, I'm going to do it the best that I can. I think I was making $5 an hour.
Yeah.
Like I started at $5 an hour. So that's kind of how it started. But I didn't want it. Like I didn't enjoy it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Like I got off track.
It wasn't like you sought it out. It was a last resort in a sense.
It was a last resort. And I know I mentioned before, like in ninth grade, you do the test where they figure out what your occupation should be. Mm-hmm. And mine was botanist. Yeah. Like, and I remember like getting made fun of, and I'm like, I'm never going to be a botanist. Like, this is kind of crazy. Yeah. Like, I don't even know anything about plants. Mm-hmm. But like, I was decent at it. Like, I should have been fired the first year. I would call out all the time. Mm-hmm. I was lazy. I didn't want to do it. Like, I don't know why I didn't get fired.
Yeah.
But I have kind of a photographic memory, so I could remember the plants. Like the first plant I ever learned was crimson pygmy barberry.
Yeah. Yep.
Because when you move 200 of them and your arms are bleeding, you're like, I'll remember this.
Yeah.
You know, so I had a good aptitude for it, and then they kind of figured out that my boss at the time was encouraging me to goof off because he wanted to goof off.
Gotcha.
And he went out with an appendicitis, and they realized that my production went way up.
Okay.
And when he came back, they laid him off and they promoted me. So that was kind of like the beginning. That was like within a year. I'd worked up to foreman.
Yeah, yeah.
And then like a year later, I'd worked myself up to wholesale yard manager. Mm-hmm. So, and even at that point, I didn't want to do it. Like I was constantly, I started taking courses at Bucks County Community College, but we met a bunch of people that like to
and what kind of courses?
It was English. Like I was taking like on course to still be a teacher. At that point I still thought I wanted to be a teacher. And but we fell into a group of people that liked to party, and we would meet up at class and then go to nightclubs. Yeah. Like at 19, like I looked old enough that I could get alcohol no problem. Like I could go into any of the stores. Like, and at that point they knew me. Yeah. So I could go in, we would grab alcohol and drive to like Club Pulsations and like drink and dance. And instead of going, so I was paying for it myself and just not doing anything.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. It's but you were relatively young.
Yeah.
And your decision making was probably still suspect.
Oh, it was poor. Like those were like my craziest years. Like between like 16 and I want to say 21, like maybe 22.
Yeah.
Were like my worst. Like I didn't make any attempt to maturing and you see how I am now. So imagine like a Fran with no inhibitions. Like my friends, all kidding. Like in high school, I was voted most talkative and class clown, but you can only have one. Yeah. So I had more votes for most talkative. But my friends voted me most likely to willingly get in the trunk of a car.
That's an interesting superlative.
They're like, they wouldn't even have to force you. They'd be like, you want to get in the trunk of the car and go for a ride? And be like, yeah, sure. Let's see see what happens. So that was kind of like how I was as a teenager.
Yep.
But now I can keep going. Like I don't know if you have questions. Like that was just how I started in the industry.
I think, I want to continue on that.
And I want to say I hadn't really fully ever embraced it until we started this podcast, where I felt that I was a part of it. I felt I worked in it.
Yep.
But now I feel like I'm a part of it.
Yeah. I have one little aside, because you're talking about when you're 19 and then you're going to the clubs and they just knew who you were.
I don't even think that's a thing anymore. Like, you don't go dancing anymore. No, but like back then.
I'm sure some people do. I've never have. But when I was in college, I had friends that would go to like the one bar in our college town, and they were just like, "Oh, just come with us." Like, I was 18 or 19, and I think it was my freshman year, end of my freshman year. I'm like, "Yeah, just come with us." And then they just never, because I was with those people, they never carded me they just served me. And then they got to know me, so I could go in whenever I wanted. Yeah. They never carded me or they always served me. And then it came down to, it was my senior year, and my roommate was having his 21st birthday. I was now 21, maybe 22, and I was about to turn 22, and he was having his 21st birthday. And because he started coming with me, they never carded him, so he'd been going there for years too, and we were saying, all of our roommates, 5 of us were going out, and we're like, we are celebrating. It's a Tuesday. We're celebrating his birthday, but we can't say it's his birthday. And so we all go in and we're like all happy, and everyone has that like one person in their group of friends who you don't really like, but you let hang around. Yeah. And it's like everyone complains about them all the time.
They're the outlier.
They're like a nice person, but they annoy everybody in the group. We had that guy too, and we're all like, the bartender comes up and is like, "Oh yeah, so what are you guys here for on a Tuesday night?" And that guy is like, "Oh, it's what's his name's birthday." She's like, "Oh, how old are you turning? Let me see IDs." And she ID'd everyone, and I was friends with these people now, and it really just soured that relationship for a while.
It always
where
does.
I got carded every time I went in, and even though they knew at that point that I was over, I was legal to come in. But in retrospect, I was like, I didn't realize how much risk I was putting on those people. I was just a 19-year-old that didn't realize it was such a big deal.
I had a similar experience. Like, I'd been going right around the corner from where I lived. There was a sports bar called AJ Sports Bar. I think it's now called McStew's, but it was half sports bar, half nightclub. And I had been getting beer from there since I was 17. So I was maybe like a month over 21. And I went in, and someone I went to high school was now working behind the counter, and his boss was there, and his boss was the one that always waited on me. Mm-hmm. So my friend goes, "I got to ask for your ID, but I know how old you are." And the guy's like, "Yeah, he's been coming in here for years." And when he saw my ID that I just turned in 21, he shot me like the look of death. Like, you know, like it was never the same. After, like, he would always joke around with me, and then after that, it was like I was a stranger.
Yep.
So
yeah. But
that's how I.
This is becoming like a self-help podcast in a way. It's like,
at least I'm honest about it.
When is the help coming though?
It comes. It does come. But
there are a lot of plants left. I promise everyone.
But that's how I started in the industry. So I eventually at Moon I became the wholesale yard manager. My boss had left and went to work at the Connor Pyle Company, and I had at one point they opened a retail yard. And they wanted me to manage the retail yard. And I was like, I don't want to do that. And at the time, I was laid off for the winter. And like for a lot of winters, they kept me. It was a great experience for me because at the time, Moon was a premier nursery in the industry. And I spent a winter working with Bill Barnes in propagation. I spent one winter just learning how to field prune trees. I spent one winter digging trees. I learned a lot. But I remember saying, I just want to come back and be the wholesale yard manager. I don't want to be the retail manager. And they're like, well, that's not an option. You either come back as a retail manager or you don't come back. And I didn't make the decision until I showed up. Yeah. You know, and they're like, oh, we didn't think you were coming back. You know, and I left shortly after that. But that was my foray into the nursery industry.
Yeah, but you still had a lot of steps between. So what years?
I did.
You had a lot of steps between
1992 when I left.
Okay.
So it was like January.
So we still have
91. No, I'm sorry. It was 91. It was like summer of 1991.
33 years to fill in.
Yeah.
So, all right. What happened next?
So one of my customers who was a landscaper came in. Like at the time, I think I was making like $7.25 an hour. Like I wasn't even as a manager. I wasn't making much. And when you're a wholesale yard manager, it's kind of production. It's kind of sales. You're a little bit of both because it's like you're running your own nursery.
Yeah, and it's fun. I'm just thinking about it. It's like you go back and it's like, oh, they made $7.25 a day, and in today's money, that was $10,000.
No, it wasn't a lot. It wasn't a lot. It's still like today, it'd be like making minimum wage. Yeah. You know, it wasn't a lot of money. I think minimum wage at the time was like $4.75 or $5. So one of my customers came in who was a landscape contractor in Northeast Philadelphia. And the company's still there. They've grown really big. J Sharp Landscaping. They're based in Tullytown now, I think. But he was like, hey, I could use – like if something came up and I was saying I wasn't happy, and he goes, oh, if you're not happy, I could use someone. I'll pay you $10 an hour. Yeah. And I was like, $10 an hour? That's huge. Yeah. You know, so I made the switch and I worked with him for – I did it for 6 months, and it was a good experience actually doing landscape work. It was tough though, you know, and I wasn't part of the group of guys because they all grew up together and they went my boss was my age.
Yeah.
So I'm 21 working for a 21-year-old that has the contract for mowing lawn at the Willow Grove Naval Air Force Base.
Yeah.
Huge projects, but they all went to high school together in Northeast Philly and I didn't. So I was kind of like an outsider. And I know it was the beginning in 1992, January 92, and my old boss from Moon, who was working at the Connor Pyle company, had an opening for an assistant wholesale yard manager and offered me the job, and I took it.
Yeah. One thing I think we should clarify, I'm sure there's plenty of people who know, but just for the folks who don't, what is a wholesale yard?
So it's kind of like a re-wholesale yard. So if you're
great,
like,
Fran.
well,
that really clarifies things, right?
If you're familiar with like a Northern Nurseries or a Site One, which was Shemin, it's basically a nursery store for wholesale. So at Moon and with Connor Pyle, we sold our own plants in that store. So if you wanted to walk in, plus we bought in material that we didn't grow to supplement that store to make it like a one-stop shop. So it was basically a supermarket for landscapers.
Yeah.
Basically.
And so you're not just selling plants too. A lot of times it
could be hardscaping. It could be pruners.
Yeah.
It could be,
you had tools and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It could be fertilizer. It could be soil. It could be all of those things. So I had the opportunity to be the wholesale yard manager there. The interesting thing about that job was when I took that job shortly after I got engaged to my first wife, and I was driving 70 miles each way to go to work. So I was living in Levittown, and Star Roses is down past Longwood Gardens, close to the Maryland border. So for 2 years, because I knew I was going to get married, and I knew I was going to move, for 2 years, I drove 70 miles each way to work, which you can imagine like adding another hour and a half to each way to your day, wasn't a lot of fun. But my boss got promoted. I ended up being promoted. I ended up running the wholesale yard at Connor Pyle Company. And I was there for 5 years, like 5.5 years. And I started to have at that point some aspirations. Like if I'm going to do this, I would like to move up. Like back then, nursery salesmen made a lot of money. Like there were nursery salesmen that were making $250,000. Like there's an old myth about Monrovia that what ended salesmen making that much money, they were having a sales meeting one day and someone didn't show up and they're like, I can't come in. My horse is running the Kentucky Derby. Yeah. And the sales manager was like, all right, these guys are getting paid too much. Like that's the old myth. Who knows if that's true? But I had wanted to move up. Like managing a wholesale yard is a rough life. You're working outside in the elements. You're doing all the hard labor. It can be rewarding, but it's very, very hard. So I had aspirations to become a salesman, but I kept getting passed over for promotions. So I got passed over for one sales job, and then I had applied to be general manager at Star Rose's second location. At the time, they were the third largest rose grower in the country, behind Jackson Perkins and Weeks. And I applied to be general manager of the Maryland location, and they hired. And they hired someone else, and they're like, "Oh, you had the job until Jack walked in. He's just more qualified." And the guy was so inept; he had been fired in 6 months. And I'm like, "That's who I got passed over for." And I realized I didn't feel like I had a future there.
Yeah.
So I took the first job that would take me, which was like the biggest night. I don't even list it like as my reference.
Oh yeah.
And that was when I went to work at True Green.
Yep.
As a salesman selling pesticide and herbicide treatments. What a this is interesting. Is this interesting?
Today, Fran
my
has
rambling.
been redeemed. He went to the
I've made up for
Church of Talamine
my previous sins.
Was blessed by Benjamin Vogt.
And my experience there can be highlighted by my first day of work. Was they showed us this movie, and the whole movie basically was saying that customers aren't customers. Customers are people. And then after we watched the film, our boss turned it off and said, "That's a bunch of bull. People are dollar signs." and this is what you're going to do.
Yeah.
And I was like sitting there going, oh no, I made a mistake. And at that point I did it for 6 months only because I couldn't find another job.
Mm-hmm.
It was, at this point it's 1998. I'm making decent money, but I'm working a lot of evenings. I'm not enjoying it. It's putting a stress on my home life. Like I don't have kids yet at that point. And then finally, our friend Scott Lundstrom, I don't know if from Plants Direct, he was working for Imperial Nurseries, which no longer exists, but they had wholesale yards, and they had a nursery in Connecticut and a nursery in Florida. They were owned by I'm trying to remember it's a cigar company, and I can't remember. It was part of a larger conglomerate, like Macanudo, whoever does Macanudo.
Yeah.
Like they're owned by the same company. So he was like, I think I got a spot for you, like if you're interested at one of the wholesale yards. So back to the wholesale yard again, like because that's all I knew at this point. And again, it wasn't what I loved, but I was good at it. And they got me a job at their Aston location, which is now a Site 1 location in Aston, PA, like being just a laborer. And it was probably the most fun I had, like going back, working for a big wholesale yard and not having any responsibility.
Yeah.
And it kind of rejuvenated I don't know if I want to say my love for it, but it just kind of rejuvenated how I felt about working.
And to clarify, did you know what a native plant was yet?
No. Now at Moon, we sold a lot of native plants, and they're the ones that people didn't buy. So at this point, it's all cultivars. It's really, Connor Pyle, like I said, like owned like 450 patents at the time. So they introduced blue hollies and China hollies, and they had euonymus, like Fortunii patents, like in all these new plants. So it was all about what's the new plant. I was in that mindset.
Yeah.
Like what's the new plant that we're going to grow and sell.
Oh yeah. And when we've talked, so Fran and I are both friends with the president of what
Star
that
Roses.
has become. Connor Powell has become Star Roses. And
They were bought by Ball Horticulture.
And I had an opportunity to listen to him give a presentation about like their revenue model, and was just wowed to know that so much. It might have even been the majority of the money they made every year was off of royalties from other growers.
Yeah.
It wasn't off of like they were growing plants, a lot of plants, but most of the money they were bringing in was because someone else was growing a plant that they had the patent on and had to pay them to grow it.
Oh, blue hollies and China hollies were a lot of money for them at the time.
And that was a lot of their business model. Now, we've talked to him since then, and he actually has an interest in native plants too.
Yeah.
So,
but no, like back then with roses, it's what's the new rose this year? Will it be the next peace rose? And peace rose is one of the most well-known hybrid roses, and that's a Connor Pyle introduction. But eventually everything comes off a patent.
Yeah.
So like at that point, some of the blue hollies were starting to come off a patent, and it was such a revenue stream that it's like, what's next? What's next? Like we have to keep this going. So they had Angela Treadwell was from Plants Nouveau.
yeah.
That's her company now, but she was in charge of finding new introductions.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
So, but at that point, like I was at Imperial for 6 months, and I was enjoying it. And I got a call from Princeton Nurseries with an opportunity to be assistant sales manager. And I see you smiling. I'm waiting for this.
I don't know if there's a secret here. I don't know if I want to add it to the question.
Go ahead. But it was we want you to run a brokerage division because we don't have enough plant material to sell. So you're going to go establish relationships with nurseries where we can sell their material too.
Yeah.
You can buy in for our wholesale yard. You could be the assistant sales manager under Zach Baxter, who's a sales rep now with Robert Baker Company. And when the time comes, when it gets big enough, you can choose whether you want to be the brokerage manager or you want to be assistant sales manager.
Yeah.
So that was April of 1999. I just found out that my wife was pregnant with our first. And then I started driving 70 miles each way back from Delaware to Allentown, New Jersey, and I did that for 6 months before we moved right around the corner from this nursery.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So what's the secret?
So I don't know if I want to give away the secret here.
All right.
But or how much of the secret I want to give away.
All right.
But we have a friend of our program here. I think, as he says, the program. Is that where you met?
I'm trying to think who you're thinking of.
Our infamous caller?
Yeah.
Was it then or was it later? Okay.
Before then. Oh, we can give it away.
Then.
Let's give it away. I'm not going to say who it is.
Yeah.
But so Saul, our caller Saul, I was in the industry. He's now retired, but he was the sales manager of a nursery that I purchased from. Mm-hmm. So at Connor Pyle. So I met Saul. I'm not going to say who.
Yeah.
I met Saul probably 1992 or 1993. So we go back that far. But yeah. But at Princeton, at one point he was hired after Zach left to be the vice president of sales at Princeton Nursery. So I worked under Saul for quite a few years.
Yeah. And that's why you have such a unique relationship.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time traveling together. So what had happened with my trajectory there was I was at Princeton for 8.5 years. And at some point, Zach left. I remained assistant sales manager. There was no sales manager. They hired Saul to be vice president, and there was still no sales manager.
Does Saul listen to this regularly? I know
somewhat,
he listens sometimes.
Somewhat, yeah.
So I wonder how he feels about this story.
So at one point, I didn't really want to do the brokerage stuff anymore. And they were like, we want you to be sales manager. And I'm like, I don't want to be sales manager. I'm happy being assistant salesman. I was on the road with brokerage easily 4 to 5 months a year, traveling around the country looking for plant material. And it was tough. Like at this point, I had 2 young children. I missed my oldest first steps while at a conference in Louisville. You know, and you understand that with how much you travel now for work. It was difficult, but I didn't want the responsibility. Princeton was a tough place to work. It was very political, and I didn't want to do it. And they basically said, if we have to hire a sales manager, we don't need you. It was very similar to the moon conversation. Like, if you don't want to do it, we're going to hire someone, but then we don't need you anymore. So I begrudgingly became sales manager at that point and gave up purchasing plant material. And I had my own territory at that point. Like I had 5 sales reps that reported to me, and in-house staff. I was in charge of shipping. And I had my own territory of like Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, St. Louis, and Kansas. So even though I would travel, and Saul and I would travel like 2 weeks, we would fly out to Kansas City, Kansas, and then drive through Missouri and Illinois, and then meet up with a sales rep. You know, in Michigan, and go from there. You know, so
now,
yes,
Princeton Nurseries was known for growing more native plants, but that was that a focus there, or was it something that you started to develop an interest in native plants when you were there?
No, not really. It's funny how it works, but Princeton Nurseries had a lot of patents also, you know, and Princeton Nurseries at one point was the largest nursery in the world back in the 50s. Like they would send plants by train, like when it was up in Kingston outside of Princeton. It was right by a rail station. They would load boxcars with trees and ship that way. And they eventually put the Route 1 corridor at Forrestal went right through the center of Princeton Nurseries. And that's when they sold that land. They bought land in Allentown. Like when I worked there, they'd sold the last of the land in Kingston, and we were 3,000 acres just in Allentown, New Jersey. So it was big, but volume-wise, we were no longer anywhere near the largest nursery. But we did a lot of straight species B&B, and to me, as a sales manager, production manager, we didn't sell a lot of it. So it was a headache for me. It's like we keep growing these native plants for native jobs and no one's buying them. because there wasn't that much of a focus.
Yeah.
Like they wanted, they didn't want Isha Rubrum. They wanted October Glory. They wanted all the patents that, like our biggest seller were ginkgos, you know, like because it's the tree that survived a nuclear bomb, you know, so you can put it on a urban street tree and it's going to survive. So, you know, it was really all the patents that Princeton nurseries had, and we had plenty, like very well known, like when, you know, Princeton elm was a big one, but when the elms went in decline, we had 2 Zelkova patents, Japanese Zelkova. So it was, I mean, we were all responsible for a lot of the invasives that we're trying to ban today. And it's pretty interesting. I just want to point out that every nursery I've mentioned, I think, is out of business now or no longer exist in the same form. Like, so this is the first nursery I worked at that still actually exist in the same form. But so that's where I'm at up to. That will take me up to 2007.
Okay.
But we sold natives. I knew natives, but I still didn't have the connection with natives. It was, at that point in my life, I considered myself more of a salesman than I did a plantsman. Even though I knew a fair amount. Like, I get involved in our production planning. I can go out and show you the proper ways to prune. Yeah. Like all those cultural practices, but it just didn't connect with me. Like, I did a lot of stuff on the side. I did, you know, music blogging, and I didn't know if you were going to ask about that at all. But like, I spent years writing a music blog and being a concert photographer for no pay. You know,
I did have that question on here. But seeing as we're still on question 2, I don't know if we have time for it.
Well, we're pretty much up to here. Yeah. Like at one point, Princeton decided to close its doors, and we were informed on a Friday, and it would be a 3-year plan. It wasn't going to happen overnight. It would be a 3-year plan to kind of liquidate. And that was on a Friday. And on a Monday, your father called me up, and he also called our propagator here, Glenn, and asked us to come in for job interviews. And it was a very interesting time for me. At the time, my kids were roughly like 7 and 4. And I had moved from Levittown to Delaware, from Delaware back into Jersey. And I had quite a few job offers, and some of them were pretty financially, like, really good job offers. And the one thing my wife at the time said to me was, we've moved a lot for your job, and I've willingly done it, but we have 2 young kids. They're now in school, and I really don't want to move. And part of the problem is nurseries, it's not like there's one on every street corner. Yeah. You know? Yeah. So your father brought me in, and he did most of the talking, and I think I tried to talk myself out of him hiring me. Because I was realizing I had driven by this nursery every day and knew nothing would happen. I visited once and just, you know, like a lot of the other, they're doing all those native plants. They look weedy, you know, like, what are they doing? And I remember saying to your dad, like, I know plants, but I don't know plants the way I need to know them for this job. It's like starting a new career. And he's like, you can do it. I'll help you do it. I have all the confidence that you can do it. So within 2 weeks of Princeton announcing that they were closing, I had given my notice. I had accepted a job here. Our propagator from Princeton accepted a job here, and that started the next phase of the journey.
Oh, yeah. But you kind of alluded with how you first answered the question that even though you were working here, you didn't have the same passion for native plants as you do now.
No, you know, I got it, and I was good at selling it. But I never, and it wasn't so much native plants. I still at that point wasn't convinced this is what I wanted to do for a living, you know, but I didn't know how to do anything else. Yeah. And it didn't translate to anything else. And at that point, you know, when I first started, you didn't have to have a college degree to do a lot of things. Yeah. But at that point, you needed a college degree to do most things. So I really wasn't qualified. I'd come to terms I was probably going to do this for the rest of my life, but I wasn't. I wanted to find other hobbies that I was passionate about. So, like, you know, and really, like, I think I was here maybe 1 year and we had like a record year of all time. So it was going well. Like, and I love working here. It was nothing Had nothing to do with the company or the people. It's just internally, I kind of felt like I hadn't found what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
For a living. And that's when I started. I was kind of going through my divorce. It's probably like around 2013, 2014. And, I'd always gone to a ton of concerts. I've always loved music. And I was telling someone a story about a concert, and I remember someone going, "You have really good stories. You should probably write them down and preserve them somehow." And I did. I started a music blog called My Music, My Concerts, My Life. And I started writing about some of these musical experiences. And I remember probably like around 2015 maybe, wanting to go to a concert. It was Nathaniel Rateliff and the Night Sweats, right when they got big. And the tickets were sold out. And I'm like, well, I have this blog. I wonder if that means anything.
Yeah.
And I wrote to their publicist and said, I have this blog, and gave them examples. And they gave me a photo pass and a ticket to go to a concert.
Yeah.
And it was free. And that started, I think I went to 68 straight concerts without paying from that point on. And I went to that concert, and I'm like, this is great. And I wrote about it, and then the publicist got back to me and said, did you go? And I'm like, yes. And they're like, did you write about it? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, can we see it? And I sent it to her, and she goes, this is fantastic. I want you to go to these 5 concerts.
Yeah.
And then she gave other publicists my name, and then I just had publicists start it.
Yeah.
So it became like I would work a full-time job. I'd go to 2 concerts a week. I would write at least 2 articles a week, and I started getting pretty good at it.
Yeah.
Like my photography got better. I have a friend, Janet, who has a master's in creative writing. She's in charge of government affairs for Xfinity, and she was reading some of my work. She's like, this is really good, but you've never had any training.
Yeah.
And she started becoming my editor. And she's an incredible editor. And once she started editing my work, it really started it never got popular, but people will read it and say, this is really good.
Yeah. But you would have a few, because you started a podcast with it, and you have a few hundred listens, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't like it was peanuts. It was.
No, I remember the first podcast. What year was that? Probably like 2017, I want to say. And my friend Janet and I started a podcast, and we would just talk about what, we would do album reviews for albums that just came out, or what our top Christmas songs were. Like, it was just like conversations that we had back in high school. My friend Dawn, who is a successful band manager, would come on and talk, and she would throw me she got me 6-row tickets to see Paul McCartney, or backstage passes for Red Hot Chili Peppers and things like that through her connections. So it really helped along the way.
Yeah.
At one point, she even called, I think you know the story, we were taking a company photo out at 557 Farm in the Helianthus.
Yeah. Yep.
And she called me on a work day, and I'm like, is everything okay? Like, is it just weird to get a call from her in the middle of the afternoon? And she goes, hey, tonight in Philadelphia, Tom Morello is doing his solo album premiere, and he's doing an interview and performing the album in its entirety, and the host backed out, and we would like you to be the host.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to interview Tom Morello. And I'm like, get out. She goes, say yes. Just be you. Like, you can do this. The questions are written out. Like, you can do this. And I'm like, all right, I'm in, but we're going to take a company photo. Like, I have to go. Let me call you back afterwards to get the details. So we did that. We finished. We came back. I called her, and she goes, I'm sorry, Pierre Robert is going to do it. From WMMR. Pierre Robert is an icon in Philadelphia. And she's like, I got you. Someone else beat me to it and got Pierre Robert. So, the whole next day, my friends were sending me pictures of Pierre Robert interviewing Tom Morello. And they're like, this could have been you, but it wasn't. But, that kind of – so I was doing those things, and then through going to all these concerts and connections, I was friends with DJs from the Philadelphia stations. I had made enough connections. I met someone that had an internet radio station, and he asked me to do a radio show. And at the time, jokingly, we had all come up with rap names, and mine was F Money. So I called it the F Money Show on I-99 radio. And it was like a 3-hour show once a week.
Yeah.
And like I started writing for them, and the writing got better, and I started getting sent to interview bands in person, like which I did a little bit on my own. But like I started, like I would go backstage and interview New Politics. You know, like I was starting to like get bigger things.
This was all on the side.
This was a no payment. It was just the perks. I was basically working 2 full-time jobs, getting paid for one of them, and I remember the first radio show I got drunk on the air. You know, it was one of those. I'm like, I can't do that, but the radio show kind of set like the format for what we do now as a podcast. Like my radio show would have alternative routes where I'd play a band, and then like I'd play a 4-pack of songs. I'd play a band and 3 of their influences, and it would be like the new music spotlight, and I would just do local Philadelphia bands, and then I would do like, what concerts are you going to this week? Like I would announce all the concerts, and then people get on social media. So I started like getting that format. And then I did the F Money Show podcast where it was all interviewing bands. Yeah. So again, I'd get, you know, a good episode would get 100 listens. You know, it never really took off. Like the local people would promote it, their friends would listen. And then one day you said, I think I'd like to do a pod. It was right before COVID. Like, and we had to cancel like some of the F Money Show stuff because like Saul would actually call into my radio show. Like that began the Saul call. He would call in and leave. The
bird lady called into your radio show.
The bird lady called in my radio show. So a lot of these people would call and do phony phone calls. I had 3 people that would do multiple voices that would call, and I'd play the calls on the air. You know, but like I remember canceling, and you had the idea you wanted to do a podcast, and I had the equipment. And now at this point, I decided I didn't want to do the radio show. I didn't want to write. Like I'd been doing it at this point for 6 years. Yeah. And I was just burnt out, and I didn't want to do it. Yep. And then you said, hey, I'm thinking about doing a podcast.
Yeah. So we can thank, I'll even personally thank them, is Adam Keith and Matt Dye from the Land and Legacy podcast for interviewing Dwayne Estes, who I had met earlier that year. And I was just telling this story. I've told the story on here a bunch of times, but I was just telling the story to a listener who met us at the last trade show. And I was like, I was just like, of all things I was doing, I was listening to a podcast while mowing my lawn, and heard it was a podcast I started listening to because Dwayne had put it on his LinkedIn page, and I've since continued to listen to that podcast because it's really good for habitat management with native plants.
Stay tuned for more of the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Welcome back to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery.
Turned off the mower, went inside, because I forget so many things when I'm thinking about. Went inside, told my wife, said, remember this for me. I want to start a podcast. and then I went back outside and finished mowing the lawn. And I did forget it. And I probably forgot it for about 2 weeks that I had that thought. And all of a sudden, like, popped back in my head. And that's when I came and told you.
And I do want to say, just to go back, like, I know I started to talk about it when I said I came here. But, like, all the offers that I had gotten for jobs when I came here were all over the country. Like, the one I really wanted was in Oregon, in Portland. Yeah. And I'm glad I didn't, because we know that company. I don't want to say who they are. Okay. And their kids have taken over. Uh-huh. And the one does the job that I would have been hired to do. So I wouldn't have been there. Like, my life would have been completely different.
Oh, you'll have to tell me who that is off air.
All right. But anyway,
but that's why I know a bunch of people from Oregon. I can't picture which one that would be.
But that was part of my reason of work, because I lived 5 miles from here. Like, I just moved, but I had lived 5 miles from here for like 20 years. So, but, and I have been, just for reference, I've been here for 16 and a half years now. Yeah. So you mentioned the podcast. I'm like, well, I have the equipment and I kind of know how to do it. So we sat down and talked about it. Like, let's put an outline together of what we want to do. Yeah. And it was originally going to just be all guests. It wasn't going to be me. Oh, yeah. It was like every other week we wrote a list of people that we wanted to have on. Mm-hmm. And again, at this point, I'm still not all in on native plants and like, this is what I want to do. Mm-hmm. And this is where everything changed for me. Like in 4 years, like everything completely changed, like exponentially. Like how invested I am in native plants, and it's part of me now. Like it's who I am, but it wasn't when we started.
Yeah.
I don't know if that plays through at that point. Because I'm knowledgeable about it, I can have a conversation. But I don't know if you were listening, if you could tell that.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I guess that's something we'll ask people to write in.
Yeah.
And say, if you've listened to and there's some people who've started from the beginning recently. And so they've listened. It's probably a lot more difficult for someone who's been listening from the beginning and still listening today to have noticed that change.
Yeah.
Kind of like when we're watching your kids grow up. And it's like, all of a sudden you'll get like a flashback memory from your phone saying, oh, look at this 3 years ago. Yeah. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe they were that small.
Yeah.
I actually noticed it with my son. Even like we went away for 3 days to a trade show. I even called him every day and was talking to him on the phone every day. And I get back, I'm like, man, you speak so much more clearly. Like things that you used to mispronounce, you do not like you mispronounce these on Tuesday and you don't on Friday.
Exactly.
Why did you grow up so fast? In 3 days.
Now the podcast was the start of a change for you too. Not saying that you weren't invested in native plants, but it changed the overall picture.
For sure.
I want to say.
And it also, I'll add on to something you said 10 minutes ago. Also a great perk for talking to people that we'd like to talk to, but probably have no actual reason to talk to. Yeah. And then two, for there's not as, you're not going to concerts and that kind of stuff, but you can still get press passes to the Philadelphia Flower Show.
Exactly.
That when we actually had Andrew Bunting on, that was a connection because Philadelphia Flower Show says, oh, if you want to, you can get free tickets if you're in the media. Yeah. And so I put in and they said, oh yeah, we want to have someone on your podcast too. And I'm like, oh, I guess this is kind of a trade, isn't it?
No, but it's
also not just me getting to go for free and talk about it for 5 minutes.
And we've also been invited places to do live podcasts, which is a nice perk too.
It's strengthened a lot of relationships with folks that, like I said, otherwise we didn't have a reason to talk to maybe the people at those organizations that we did before. We got to talk to their buyers, and this isn't a knock on who was buying plants, but we didn't have a reason to talk to like their executives or some of the researchers or those kind of things. So we have good relationships with them too, and they keep us in mind with things that they're doing.
Now, my friends have always mainly been friends in the industry. Mm-hmm. But like this even changed, like my best friends are people that we compete against. Like I know I posted on LinkedIn the other day and on social media, like we were out to dinner and someone had taken a picture and I'm like, these are a lot of my friends and we're sitting around having a great time. Yeah. They're also all competitors, you know, and we're all in the same space. And I feel really fortunate that we all work together and we all help each other. And I think this has even strengthened that. So like, it didn't happen like all at once, like the first episode, Here It Goes. Like I know the Dwayne Estes episode was a big one, and I'm learning a lot. The Enrique Sala one, like after reading that book and getting to talk to someone from National Geographic and have these in-depth conversations, it's kind of like you say, like once you see these things or once you know these things, you can't unknow them.
Yep.
And
I guess it is possible to unknow them, but it probably is going to happen later in life.
It's very hard. Yeah. But just having in-depth conversations with experts, you know, talking to Doug Tallamy about these things, and they kind of approach you like you're on their level, kind of changes how the conversation is.
Yeah. And
having these conversations I never felt like, I still don't feel like I'm an expert, but I feel like I'm part of the space. Like it's native plants. I rip out invasives. I only plant native plants in my yard. Like it's my lifestyle now. It's who I am. If I cease to work in a native plant nursery, I wouldn't change that part of my life. And I kind of feel that I can, you know, we joke around that it seems like everywhere I go, I'm now the person that raises her hand or stands up and says that's wrong or this isn't right. Like I feel comfortable doing that. Like I feel well versed enough that I can have these conversations and back it up with science. And like I feel like I'm part of this, legitimately part of this space, and I embrace it. I think the podcast got me to embrace it. Like,
Yeah.
you've been doing this for a long time. People know you. You're well respected. Why aren't you embracing this?
Yeah.
And as soon as I put any effort into embracing it and promoting it, everything changed. So all this time I'm looking for some kind of meaning in my life. Like, I'm writing about musicians and they liked it, but I'm not a musician. I'm not one of them.
Yeah.
It never really, I was always like on the fringe, but I'm part of this. Like,
Yeah.
I am.
I guess
Native
another
plants.
analogy with it is like how athletes always get upset with the sports reporters because they're like, you aren't one of us.
Yeah.
You write about it and you pretend to be one of us, but you aren't one of us.
We're,
We are actually these people.
Yeah.
We're in this industry, and if anything, this has boosted our status, I guess is. I hate to say it that way, but yeah, it kind of has.
And we approach it the right way. Like, growing up, so the high school that I went to, the sports programs were horrible. And it was a big working class neighborhood, not that far removed from segregation.
Yeah.
If you think about it, like, or bus, like when I was a kid in elementary school, there was still segregation busing and of some sort. And the biggest thing our school was known for was its drama program and musical theater. And our drama teacher, they made a TV show about, like the NBC show Rise with Josh, what's his name from How I Met Your Mother? Rosie Perez was in it.
I know.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, it was a big deal. And it was a big deal to parents because it was the 70s and the 80s. And you have kids that say, I don't want to play football. I want to be in the musical. You can imagine, like, that didn't go. It was very much like the Breakfast Club back then. So, but in high school, I was a like new wave, like goth, like part of high school, and you have that DIY like method. Like, it's do it yourself. You're part of this community. We would make our own clothes. We didn't do our own music, but we were different. We found a way to do things. And that's kind of stuck with me my whole life. And I feel like we do that with the podcast. Like, we created something without anyone telling us how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
We just said, we're going to do this and create something. I felt like it's different from what's in the space at the time. Like, I'm sure there's more things like this now. But I felt like we created something. We were really, I don't know how you feel. I felt like we were creating it for the general public. I was shocked at how many of our peers listen.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. No, we definitely made this the initial mission, and the mission's changed. But the initial mission was, we have people who like us on Facebook and are interested in what we do, but don't qualify to be customers of ours because of their either homeowners or the size of their business, those kind of things. And we wanted to be able to steer them to organizations that could do business with us, and also pique their interest, because native plants impact people's lives in a variety of ways. If you like duck hunting, then you're going to want to have a quality wetlands to attract ducks, which hint full of native plants. And so we'd have Ducks Unlimited on. So those people would listen to that and say, oh, I didn't know I can join Ducks Unlimited or donate money or buy a duck stamp, and now I'm getting all this. And then it was building some goodwill. The key for us was it built some goodwill with some people, gave us that opportunity to talk to people we otherwise couldn't talk to, and maybe it would trickle back to us in the end. And same thing with Xerxes' side. It's like, and let's face it, what makes quality duck habitat can also make quality insect habitat. So it's like, it goes hand in hand. It's the same process. It's just different end goal. And so we've said that a bunch too.
Yeah. But I think coming from that DIY ethos, like you're in high school, you're like a punker or a goth, and you have your community. But then there's other places. Like, for us, it was City Gardens in Trenton. You'd go to a new wave show, and there'd be other new wavers, and you're part of that community. Yeah. Like, I think we helped do that. Not saying I feel like we kind of help bring that community together. Like, we have a native plant community that's a very DIY, very punk. Almost like it's always been there. It's always kind of been like bubbling below the terra firma as an aquifer. Yeah. And now it's kind of coming out, and it's got this, I look at people like John Mark Courtney, who's doing like really unique marketing stuff with posters and things like that. I feel like we kind of all do it and we all support each other in a way that takes me back to like those types of communities as a kid. And I feel very fortunate. Wow, I'm boring you.
No.
Yeah.
I was up I went to bed at 1 last night and I woke up at 5.
Oh,
so I just
fun.
haven't slept a lot.
We got snow last night. Tom was plowing snow at 5 in the morning. But I feel like we helped bring that group together. Like, I'm not taking all the credit, but we were a cog in helping to create that community that exists today, and it's getting larger and more popular. And I think we approached it, when you have a community like that, you approach it with kindness. And I think that has been a big factor in our podcast.
Yeah.
Just to be accepting and kind of who wants to be. We want this community to be larger. It's kind of changed who I am. It's really weird to say that, but it didn't just have me embrace native plants and have it be a fabric of who I am. It changes how I talk to people. It changes how I approach things. It really has changed me for the better. And it's actually my wife now, Agatha. We met we started this in 2020. We started dating like the year before.
Yeah.
So I think it's like everything kind of like lined up perfectly in my life.
Yeah.
Like at that point, like, and I just feel at home. Like for the first time in a long time, like I'm like, this is who I am. This is what I do. I'm not like, hey, I work in a nursery and I do music writing. It's like, no. Like, I think my LinkedIn statement is I start conversations about native plants.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what I do.
Oh, yeah.
And you see it when we go to a trade show. Like, we were just at Mance. I'm sure we'll talk about that on the next Buzz episode. But it was a completely different experience, partly because of this podcast.
Yeah.
And where it's grown to.
Yeah.
And where native plants have grown to.
Exactly. No, I agree with you there. I'm looking at time.
All right. Did you have any?
We've been doing this for like almost an hour.
It's an hour and 5 minutes. Yeah.
Okay.
Did you have questions did I cover most of your questions without you having to ask them?
I think you cut
anything.
Some.
Any
Some,
funny?
but no.
Any funny ones I can answer quick?
Yeah. What? I had one question on here saying, "What is your funniest experience in the nursery industry?"
I can't talk about it.
I figured you wouldn't be.
I will say it's the funniest experience I ever had happened at a management clinic in Louisville, Kentucky. Which
and they made you sign an NDA.
Yeah, it's not radio appropriate, but it's like one of those things that happen in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happened in Louisville stayed in Louisville. But it was the bars in Louisville I don't know if they still are. Were open till 4 a.m, and it was a day of drinking that started at 4 p.m. and went till 4 p.m. with a group of people that just kind of went all over.
Yeah,
one of the funniest stories, or I don't want to say funny, shocking things I ever heard in the nursery industry. I was with a sales rep. I was at Princeton. It was one of our sales reps was touring a customer.
Yeah.
And the salesman was older and grew up on a cut flower farm in PA. This customer grew up next to the cut flower farm. Just by coincidence. Like, they didn't know each other then. And the guy's like, as a kid, we used to throw rocks through your dad's glass greenhouse panes. Like, we would do it all the time and break the glass. And he goes, yeah, that was you? And they're like, yeah. And he goes, yeah, I shot your cat. And the guy's like, what? He goes, yeah, it kept coming. I shot your cat. We're even. I was just like, whoa, this just got real.
Oh, wow.
Like, but there were plenty of stories. Like, back in the late 80s, early 90s, the nursery industry was the Wild West. Like, when the first year I started at Star Roses was the last year. At Memorial Day, they would have a party, and they closed. And it was growing season between Memorial Day and Labor Day. Yeah. Like, you weren't open. You didn't ship. There were no pickups. You just closed, and you grew. Like, can you imagine that today? Like, that was –
yeah.
And then we only had radios in the spring, and this was a location that was 26 miles of greenhouses. And at the end of spring, they took your radio, they took your front end loader because they were all rented. Like, we were loading bald and burlap trees by hand for the rest of the summer. Or if you needed someone, you drove around till you found them. Like, it just seems absurd. It was really glorified farming back then.
Oh,
it wasn't.
Yeah, it's not what it is today.
It's not what it is today. It was really just a different type of farming. And it was the stories that I can't say are like, it really was like the Wild West. But that kind of changed by the time I was leaving Star Roses, that had changed greatly
Yep.
in a 5-year span.
Yeah. I had another thing I was going to add on there, but I don't remember what it was.
Well, it's the funniest story.
yeah.
Did it have?
Funniest story. Oh, did you happen to see this? I was thinking about bringing this up on the Buzz, but I'm like, it's not pertinent enough. But part of my anti-cat agenda. Did you happen to see the news story about there's a research that has linked? I haven't read it, but it linked cat ownership to schizophrenia.
No.
And I found out about it on an Instagram account called Reed Sings the News or Reed's Piano News.
Wow.
And which is something, check it out. It's pretty funny.
Okay.
It's a guy and he finds headlines and he makes songs about it.
I like that.
And but I heard a little bit about it, but I haven't read it yet. I find it hard to believe, but I guess part of it is they cause toxoplasmosis that can make you really sick and I guess see things. So it's like, oh, maybe there is a little bit of something here. So
speaking of articles, I think that was a huge part. You making that suggestion and incorporating that to the Buzz was a huge part of my growth in native plants too, because you're constantly learning new things. And now I read a lot of native plant books, and I talk to a lot of other, like the people that we've had on as guests, like who were just people I admired are now friends.
Yeah.
And you get to have these conversations over and over, and you see the bigger picture, and it's just really, I just feel so fortunate that you had this idea that changed my life. I'm sure it changed your life too.
I've changed your life.
You've changed my life for the better.
Oh yeah, it has. It definitely has changed my life too.
For the better.
And you were saying how it's changed you in so many ways. I've found it's definitely changed the way I think, the way I comprehend things.
How I approach things.
Yeah, how my approach on things is. It's changed some of my personal beliefs, some of my political beliefs. Just getting to talk to these people who are really, really intelligent. And one of the things that kind of makes me laugh, I've been involved with this invasive species bill in New Jersey that got vetoed, which, long story short, they ran out of time.
We'll talk about that on the Buzz.
Because Murphy wants to assert his will.
Yeah.
But a lot of the folks say our industry, like our end of the industry, is privy to a lot of these conversations, us even more so because we seek them out for content. But there's so many of these nursery people who are against the whole, some of them are just against the entire idea that there is such a thing as a native plant. Yeah. And a line they say a lot, and our executive director of the Nursery Association listens to this sometimes, so she may even hear me say it, but a line they say a lot is, oh, we need to go off science and not feelings. And I've really bit my tongue saying, oh, seems like you're the guys who are thinking with your feelings, and they're the ones with the science.
We got a lot of science.
I think you're going to, and we've been talking about who, if we had a council for this, who would make up the council.
Yeah.
And there's some names that are thrown out there, and I'm like, who are very against against the whole concept that plants can be invasive. And there's some hesitation to put some of them on because they're going to be combative and not open-minded. And I'm like, I agree with some of that, but it might be hard for them to not be open-minded when they are confronted with so much evidence contrary to what they believe.
Yeah.
And some people just hardens them, makes them bury down and get harder.
But we even see it in our end. Yeah. One of the things I mentioned earlier was like I seem like I'm always the guy raising his hand saying no.
Yeah.
And I was at a conference in Maryland in December, and just at the moment, someone didn't show up for a panel, growers panel, and I got asked. And someone in the audience put down someone that sells native plants, but not all native plants.
Yes.
And I was the first person to defend them.
Yeah,
very
but
kindly.
I put down like disparaged, not like wrote them down.
Like they're not doing it right. Yeah. Like you do what you do, don't do what they do because they're doing things wrong, and it's bad for the industry. And I was the first person to defend them.
Yeah.
Like, because I'm just like, no, that's not true. Yeah. And this is why that's not true. And we all need to celebrate this person
constantly. Now.
Yeah.
And it's like it has no bearing on our business at all. In fact, letting people believe what you're saying, where that is the wrong way to do things, probably helps us in many ways, but I don't like seeing incorrect information go out there.
I agree. I agree.
But and we're actually going to be digging into that a little bit.
We will.
End of this month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
is
like
it our next episode?
2 weeks. No. Yeah. The next guest episode.
The next guest episode.
So
that'll be fun.
But yeah, it's been a long, crazy journey. You know, like I feel like how I grew up, like is a different generation in a different time. Like I think I shared this at some point. Like when I was a kid, like the first time I got drunk, it was my baseball coach that got the team drunk.
Yeah.
Like I was 11 years old.
Yeah.
And I got rewarded because we were driving to the little league I played for. They would get tickets for everyone to go to a Phillies game. And our coach was only 19 years old. And at the time, like drinking age was 18. He had a couple cases of beer and started handing them out on the drive there. And I got rewarded because a cop drove by and I ducked below the window while still chugging a beer. So he was like, I like the way you think. Like, give him another beer. Like, and just told us, like, we got to the vet stadium and we're all drunk and he gave us some helpful, incorrect information on how to pick up women. You know, a bunch of 10 through 12-year-olds and then just let us go. But it was like the bad news bears. Like, that's what life was like. I feel coming from that kind of era to where I am today gave me a lot of good understanding, gave me a good way of not to do things.
It wasn't the Wild West. It was just Pennsylvania.
It was Levittown. But it was, it was just a big working class neighborhood. Like Levittown is huge.
Oh, yeah.
Like it was at the time, I think the largest planned community,
Yeah.
Levittown, Pennsylvania in the country. So it was just crazy. It's just a long journey looking back, talking about all this stuff to where I am today. It's just amazing that I got here, one, alive, and two, as level-headed. Like, I think what works well between you and I approach a lot of things with emotion.
Yeah.
I think you're a lot more level-headed. Like, you put a lot more thought into things when we discuss it, I think, initially than I do. Because I let my emotional response, I think, come out
that's
first.
mostly just because I lack a lot of emotion when it comes to things. It's, I was going to give a personal example, but I don't need to get into that.
No.
But it's like, I look at a lot of things and say, well, those are facts of life. Why should I be upset when it's something that should happen?
Yeah. No, and that's...
Even when it comes to like pets that have passed away, it's the cycle.
Yeah,
it's supposed to happen, but it's also, I think I have some brain stuff that goes on in there too, that makes me that way.
But I look back at my childhood and I have a lot of friends that are insanely what's the word I'm looking for? They've been,
based on what you said about your friends, you're either going to say successful or
insanely successful, or they didn't make it. And I look back at my life through the nursery career; it's 35 years and counting. And there were people that made it, and people that didn't make it, people that never grew beyond what they were doing at that time. And I feel along the way, I continued to grow, and I'm not done growing. And I look back, and I've made a lot of really good friends, and feel at home in what I do.
So
I hope people find this interesting.
Oh, yeah. You mentioned that you read a lot more now.
Yeah.
What are some books, movies, podcasts, TV shows that have kind of transformed your opinions on native plants recently? Or helped you grow, I guess is a better way to say it.
You know, the big one for me was braiding sweetgrass. That really changed that, not just looking at native plants from what it does for the ecosystem, but your own personal connection and what it means. The Nature by Enrique Sala really changed that. It's not just plants; it's the ocean. It's everything, and how to look at just how nature works. Which he broke it down. Like those two are big ones. Soil by Camille Dungy is another one that just how it connects to your everyday life. Those ones for me made a big impact. What's the I can never remember the name. I call it something different. The documentary with Ray Archuleta.
Kiss the Ground.
Kiss the Ground was a big one for me, and I know there's another one about regenerative soil that made a big impact on me. You know, those types of things.
Yeah, and a little teaser for that too is a couple of people have reached out to us digging more into that concept of regenerative agriculture and how it ties into native plants, if it can tie into native plants. So I have a connection with a farmer from a different part of the country that's considered one of the experts in this field.
Yeah.
Maybe I wouldn't even. I think they're an expert. They might not think they're an expert, but they're one of the more highly regarded people in this field. So I'm hoping we can have them on sometime this spring. We're in the coordination phase of that. They have the invite link. They just have not scheduled yet.
I would like that. Yeah.
So,
and actually, I want to point out before we forget in the thing, our next 2 guest episodes are both live episodes.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. I guess the second one isn't like it's pre-recorded.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of live. Yeah. But
so Fran, you kind of threw off the script here.
Sorry.
You did answer a lot of questions through there.
That's what I do.
This was written to be like a lighthearted and jovial conversation. You kind of made it like a really deep, a much deeper conversation than I had written, which is good. I think it's a good thing.
I kind of felt like I've talked about a lot of this stuff, but never, like I glossed over it.
Yeah.
I never really explained why.
Yeah, and I think it's really enlightening. While we didn't talk about plants as much, I think it's enlightening to understand your transformation over the years and how you've gotten to be someone that people look forward to listening to every week. And it wasn't always this way.
No.
And I'm hoping it sheds some crap. I just had the word and I lost it. It's the lack of sleep thing.
What's inspiration?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I'm hoping you become or inspirational for some people who do feel well.
If I can do this, anybody can.
Yeah,
do this.
One of the things. And I'm blanking on the name right now. I have it written in a notebook. But one of the things we just had was at this past trade show, someone who said, "Hey, I had a career in something else." I don't want to speculate on their age, but they had a career in something else for 20 some years, and we're like, it was time for me to change paths and do something that was better for the earth. I still want to work. I still want to do stuff, but I want to know I'm making a difference to the planet. So, and they were walking the trade show looking for potential opportunities.
There were a lot of people like that.
Oh, yeah.
There really was. Like native plants have become so big. There are people like, I need to be a part of this. This is what I bring to it.
Yeah.
How can I help?
Yeah. So
I didn't know those answers.
My takeaways from a lot of your story today is be persistent, put yourself out there, don't be afraid to make a change, and at the very least try and do something that's media related or press related so you can get free stuff.
Yeah, no, totally. It's back before the podcast, if you looked at my LinkedIn page, it had nothing to do with this career. It had to do with all music. I was friends with all PR people or band managers or people in bands. So it's just, I would have never have guessed that this would have been my trajectory and that I would fully embrace it, but, or that people would fully embrace me to be like somewhat of a spokesperson for this movement.
I have, 3 more things that I want to do here.
Sure. Go ahead.
And they're relatively quick.
Okay.
I think.
Okay.
Going back to this is like I was trying to figure out how do I transition from what we just talked about to some more lighthearted stuff.
All right, do it.
And say if you were the president, what is the one change you would make to U.S. policy regarding native plants?
Ooh, I think there would have to be a national invasive ban list.
Yeah,
not per state. Like, that's even tough because things are invasive here that aren't invasive in other. Like, I know the butterfly bush and Scotch broom are invasive.
Regionally.
There could be a regional. Yeah. I think that would have to be more policy. Make sure that those plants, what they do to our natural lands.
Yeah.
I would definitely, any national park would have to be strictly native plantings.
Yeah.
I think that would have to be instituted somehow, that if we're restoring national parks, it has to be.
And I know I
don't know if something like that exists.
From Pennsylvania, I don't even know if he's still in office, but I think he had some legislation that did that. I don't know if it ever went through. I reached out to their office and trying to get him on and never heard back. This was like 3 years ago.
But any national park, if something other than a native plant to that area is being planted, I think it does a disservice to the national park.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Of celebrating what that park is in that region, so.
Yeah, and I'd even go further and say, yeah, it's got to be like native plants to that region. And I think the national parks are starting to do a really good job of that.
I agree.
And
we're seeing more and more
making Utah look like Utah, which is where I will be when you're listening.
Woohoo!
So just having gone to some national parks. What has been your favorite part of Native Plants Healthy Planet? Is it a particular guest, particular instance?
I think it's the friendships. I really, I was just saying, if you go through the contacts of my phone, most of the people in there are people in this industry. And I think getting to know some of these people better. And I'm an introvert. Like, I'm not someone that like goes out and hangs out all the time, and I'm not good at reaching out. Like, I can just, if we left here and didn't work together anymore, it may take a long time before I send you a text. Not anything personal, I'll just fade away. So it's some of the people that I've gotten to know better and have relationships with and hang out and say, let's do something, that kind of thing. Or we were just in Mance and we can send a couple texts, and next thing you know, we have a group of people hanging out where we're at.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's what I've enjoyed most. I appreciate all the listeners. I enjoy when at Mance, and again, we're going to talk about this, I started writing down people that would come up and say, I don't necessarily do business with you, but I wanted to say I listened to the podcast and thank you.
Yeah.
I started, you started doing it. I'm like, I should do this too, is keeping a list for listener shout outs.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I had somewhere like between 15 and 20 people.
Yeah.
Like in the course of 3 days.
I wrote down like the first 3, and then I was walking around so much and just forgot to write stuff down. And
but it was very
I had a bunch.
It was very, and people were kind of.
So don't be upset if I don't give you listener shout out. Is basically what I'm saying.
I wrote. Hopefully
you got most of the ones that I would.
But a lot of people came up and were like interviewing me almost, like asking additional
Mm-hmm.
questions and asking my opinion on things, and it was just very humbling.
Those always are like, I don't want to say weird interactions, but they're different interactions for me, because I don't want to necessarily talk about the podcast all the time. Not because I'm embarrassed by it. It's more that I'm like, I feel like I'm bragging about it. And I'm like, but people are asking you questions, then it's like, and it's something we're really passionate about. So you want to go on and on and on, but then you're like, oh man, this kind of sounds like I'm just telling you about like all the cool people I've gotten to talk to and how all this other stuff.
Now I know this has happened to you too. How strange is it when someone asks you to take a selfie with you? For the podcast.
I just don't like selfies, I guess.
I don't mind it.
Like, even when my wife asked me to take a selfie, I'm like,
like, I'm not discouraging anyone from asking, but like, it's hard to imagine that someone that you don't know personally is coming up and are so excited to meet you that they want to get your picture taken and posted on. It was just like a very, very humbling experience, but very cool. Like, I went home and someone took a selfie with me.
Oh, yeah.
Like, they recognized me and were fans of the podcast. And like, I feel we have great listeners. Like, I really do. I think I really feel like we have a great group of listeners.
For sure.
But it's interesting getting here. Like, and out of a 35-year career, it's only taken the last 4 years to. Yeah. I mean, fortunately, I have the background. I don't know if I would have been ready for any of this without the previous 31 years. But what else? You have another?
I got one more thing.
Okay.
Before we ask the most important question.
All right.
And that is, it's actually something you did before, because when I wrote this episode,
all right,
I made you do this part.
Okay.
And I didn't change it. I left it the same, kind of see what might have changed with your answers.
All right.
And that is a rapid fire round.
All right.
I have basically this or that questions. You pick one. We're going to do it as fast as we can. No thinking. First thing that comes to your mind is what you're going to spit out.
Okay.
And they're not all plant related.
All right, cool.
And then when you're done, I'll give you a little bit of time to explain maybe one of your more controversial answers.
All right. All right. I'm ready. This is exciting. I'm looking forward to this.
All right. Ready?
Yes.
Cardinal flower or blue lobelia?
Cardinal flower.
All right. Pats or Genos?
Genos.
Would you drink water from a hose?
Yes.
Pork roll or scrapple?
Pork roll.
Rain garden or pollinator meadow?
Ooh, they can be the same. I'm going to say rain garden.
All right. My Chemical Romance or Foo Fighters?
My Chemical Romance.
Steely Dan or Dave Matthews Band?
You really going to make me pick one of those?
Yeah. Yeah, you gotta.
Dave Matthews Band.
Sweet Pepperbush or Winterberry Holly?
Winterberry Holly.
The 80s or the 90s?
80s.
Tree, shrub, forb, graminoid, or other?
Shrub.
All right. And you have to eat one, peanut butter or Brazil nut.
Peanut butter, because Brazil nut will kill me. Peanut butter will just make me gag.
All right. Which of those would you like to kind of expand upon?
Is there one that you are curious? Like some of them are easy. Like drinking from a hose, I've been doing it my entire life.
Yeah.
Now that you know you're not supposed to do it, it hasn't killed me yet. So I figured, whatever.
I think mine would be the rain garden or pollinator meadow, because you really did stall there for a little bit.
I chose rain garden because a rain garden can still be a pollinator garden. So I think you can do both. Like filtering water is a huge need to recapture that instead of the runoff. Like being able to clean and filter it and serve the purpose where it can be contribute to the ecosystem. So I feel they're both incredible things, but I think the rain garden, you can get the best of both worlds. And I chose, if I had to expand on one, I chose cardinal flower over blue lobelia, only because I know its function, but there's not that many red flowers in our part of the country for native plants. So,
last question is, what is your favorite native plant?
Hasn't changed.
It's still the same.
It hasn't changed. And someone just asked me at this Mid-Atlantic Nursery Trade Show, and it's still Iris versicolor, just in its simplicity, something very singular, very simple, but can take 6 inches of permanent inundation, can take periods of dry, can be in a rain garden, can have phytoremediation properties and remove toxins from the soil, can support hummingbirds early in the season. There's just so many things, and it does it so – it's not braggadocious. It's just very beautifully simple. And I think given all the wonderful things that it does, it's still – no one's been able to knock that one off its pedestal for me.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great plant too.
Thank you.
And nice early bloom, nice rain garden plant.
Exactly. So,
all right. Do you want to do a final thought, or should we save that for people who really matter?
You know what? I would love our listeners to have a final thought, not just for me, but for both of us and the podcast. We'll leave this. What's your final thought on this episode?
Yeah.
And like when we post this on social media in the Facebook group, tell us your final thoughts. We'd be happy to hear it, because our journey isn't over. We're still in the early stages of it. We talked about it. Like, I never thought we would make it this far, and now I don't see it ending. Like something would have to happen. There's so many things that we can talk about, so many guests. Things have changed so many times in the last 4 years that as long as we have interesting conversations to have, I don't see not ever doing this. So.
Yeah, I agree. And I know about when we made this script because I have the name Oliver Millman in here.
Wow, that was a long time ago.
So that's going to wrap us up. Make sure you leave us your final thought when we post this episode in the Facebook group. I want to thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed listening to not Oliver Millman, but Fran Chismar. For more information, you can visit. Fran, do you have a personal website?
I do. It's www.nativeplantfran.com.
All right. So you can visit that website, and Fran puts up a lot of really great videos on his own personal social medias too. It's
all the links to all my social media, which are all Native Plant Fran. Plus, I have links to stuff like my music, my concerts, my life, if you ever want to read any of that, or the F Money Show. And also, my wife and I did, during COVID, takeout tournaments where we would get like the same food from two different places. Like we would say wings, and we'd go to two top places in the area, eat it in the car, and then pick one. So it was we did that for a while. We just, after COVID stopped, no one wants to eat in their car. We can actually go somewhere and sit down and eat. So, but you can find all that stuff there if you're interested.
So Thank you for. Oh yeah, where was I? I was like, Fran, aren't you supposed to say something?
Oh yeah. So we're gonna say thank you to the Egocentric Plastic Men, who, and our relationship with them is they were actually guests on the F Money Show podcast. So they contributed our theme music for the Meet the Guest episodes. Make sure you stream or buy their music wherever you consume music. Thank you to Dave Bennett for a Native Plant Anthem. Follow the podcast on Twitter at Pineland Nursery, Facebook at Pinelands Nursery NJ, Instagram at Pinelands Nursery, and also YouTube at Pinelands Nursery. Don't forget Instagram also, Native Plants _Healthy Planet. We have the question and comment line, which we love. Give us a call and ask a question, leave a comment. You can call it 215-346-6189. I will repeat that, 215-346-6189. If we pick your question or comment, we'll play it and answer it on a future episode of The Buzz. And or we'll do our best to play it on a future episode of The Buzz. And don't forget about the Facebook group, the Native Plants Healthy Planet Facebook group. Such a wonderful group, just keeps growing, and the conversations keep staying very positive. Yeah. I appreciate that.
So you can buy our Native Plants Healthy Planet merch at our website, www.nativeplantshealthyplanet.com. There's a link right at the top that takes you to our store. A lot of cool designs up there, especially if you love Bigfoot.
And the new podcast artwork should be switched in the next week, like on the website and on like social media. So that will lead to more merchandise now that we have the new logo. So we're slowly rolling it out.
I was thinking about this last night as I was cleaning off all the images from my computer and saw how many images on my phone were podcast related or merch related. Yeah. And I was like, we have a clothing designer, former clothing designer working for us. Why am I not letting her do some of this design stuff herself instead of her sending me things?
Because every time I ask if something can be done, what she comes up with is amazing. Yeah. And I'm like, we should just say, design a few shirts. Yeah. See what you think.
Yep. I think it's something where the more of this stuff we can move, and not saying there's anything wrong with what we have up there now, but they're very basic overall. But the more of this stuff we can move, the more money we're able to give to organizations that need it.
We've done a lot of good. Yeah. We've done a lot of good, and we've handled it very. I'm very proud of how we've handled it.
Yeah, definitely. Then make sure, if you haven't already, leave us a 5-star review, hit subscribe.
We had 5 new 5-star reviews. No one left a comment.
Yeah, so I don't know who you are, so I can't talk about you. Yeah. But you can listen really wherever you listen right now, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts. Just keep listening there. Or if you want to try it out somewhere else, listen twice. So, but with that, thank you, everyone. I'm Tom.
And I am Fran. Thank you again, everyone. Coming up next week, we have a live episode from the New Jersey Total Plants Expo.
We have a Buzz episode first.
Oh, never mind. All right, never mind. Yeah. We have a Buzz episode next, so make sure you tune in. It's written down here, and I ignored it anyway. Yeah. So,
but you are going to be interested in that live episode because I think it's a controversial topic, and I think we're going to present it in a really friendly and we're really going to explain a lot. Yeah. We're going to pull back the curtain on a lot of stuff, debunk some myths that you might see online.
We've kind of had this person on before as part of a group, and we've kind of talked about it a little bit, but we're going to deep dive it.
Yep.
So
cool.
So make sure you tune in for that, and until then, keep it native.
Woods, wetlands, and dales grows a bounty of beauty that never fails. Our native plants, so diverse and so rare, treasures of our land beyond compare. From the ferns below, soaring oaks above, each plant has a place each Bentley's love. Monarch caterpillars launch milk, wheat so tall, bees buzz about, sipping nectar fall. Oh, native plants, how you grace this land. In your diversity, we will take a stand. To preserve our generations to come, and beauty and potency second to none. To protect and preserve the earth, to restore the native plant move that you just can't ignore.
Goldenrod, asters, and flowers galore. Monarch is so stunning, can't help but adore. Their colors, their fragrance, a feast for the eyes. Their value to wildlife, no need to disguise.
Native plants, how you grace this land. In your diversity, we will take a stand.
Thank you for listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Remember to like, share, follow, and comment.